Hello, I will be presenting my interpersonal communication skills improvement goal of decoding messages. My name is Ebony, and decoding messages better through interpersonal communication is what became a goal because of the week one post-year introduction assignment. In this assignment, we were to complete the interpersonal communication skills assessment. And for feedback, I received a 7 out of 10. The feedback was skills in communicating back to the source of a message about my understanding and interpretation of the message. Initially, I did not see that as a bad score. I did not think I needed to improve because I believed I needed to leave room for understanding others and removing personal biases. Boy, was I wrong. I have learned so much about decoding messages and how well I actually understood what I heard. My interpretations are not always wrong, yet, throughout the class assignments, I learned where I was wrong and returning those messages back as far as interpersonal communication. In this presentation, I will be speaking in detail about my experience with decoding messages. I will briefly describe what decoding messages mean, my reason for setting this goal and its challenges. I will then talk about how learning about decoding messages benefited me and the results of incorporating decoding messages into interpersonal communication. Finally, I will conclude by advising anyone interested in improving the decoding messages skill set for interpersonal and intrapersonal communication. Decoding messages. What is it? According to Renee Edwards, a professor in the Department of Communication Studies at Louisiana State University, when decoding messages is not done properly, conflict can arise within interpersonal communication by not understanding the context of the conversation, incorrectly interpreting the self concept of the person in interpersonal communication, inappropriate responses to what is heard, misunderstanding of emotional responses, verbal and nonverbally, shock when noticing the interaction during interpersonal communication is different from what is expected. And according to Bevan, from the Communication 200 course book, what affects decoding messages is verbal and nonverbal messages due to nonverbal leakage mentioned in section 4.3, the inability to interpret or gain a clear understanding of how another presents communication, the impression given by the person who engaged in interpersonal communication. And in short, Bevan states in section 7.2, a lack of listening skills to create meaning, which is encoding, can affect how decoding happens, which is the attempt to understand the message, can affect the interpersonal communication in a whole. So, why did I choose decoding? Well, the negative reasons mentioned by Edwards and Bevan that affect whether or not the interpersonal communication can reach conflict resolution is why decoding became a goal for me. During conflicted conversations, I did not like hearing that I didn't care, or I was not listening, or even the big one, I don't want to do this anymore. As hard as I tried to listen, there were times when the impression I gave did not match my self concept, and I took a hit on my self esteem. I did not want to change how I viewed the other person I was communicating with, though I needed to know why I was receiving the feedback that I felt was harsh. In decoding messages better, I wanted to understand empathy further and align that with my words. I wanted to learn better ways of communicating verbally and nonverbally and interpret better from what I listened to while maintaining my relationship during interpersonal communication conflicts. The challenges presented were hard to overcome, which were reappraisals, perception taking, emotions, and reciprocation. Edwards spoke about decoding messages in three stages: reappraisals and perception taking, which is Edwards' stage one of decoding messages, are challenging during interpersonal communication. I found myself in stage two of decoding messages a lot, which are emotional responses. Stage two gave me a whirlwind of mixed feelings, and I found it hard to back down into stage one again due to intrapersonal communication, like fighting for who I believed I was understood as. Belvin's advice on reciprocation in section 7.4 was hard to do concerning self disclosure because of how the interpersonal conversation felt. Not only did decoding messages force my attention on whom I was speaking with, but it was hard to see who I was presenting as different from the impressions I initially provided. Decoding messages reminded me of the dark side of communication mentioned in Bevan's section 9.1 and communication apprehension mentioned in section 5.1. After understanding myself and my intrapersonal communication, I learned to reestablish rapport in interpersonal communication. Decoding messages became much more beneficial to assess the conversation, myself, and others, how to use confirming messages for empathy statements, and doing conflict management during relationship maintenance. As a result of learning how to decode messages, I was not doing reciprocal in the way self disclosure should have been received. In my use of self disclosure, my responses explained away the emotional responses others shared because I felt they were damaging to me. I did not stay in the context of the conversation, and the nonverbal cues I gave were not welcomed. Edward's third stage of decoding messages is retaliation. It is the combination of the satisfaction of how stage one of reappraisals and perception taken happened and stage two, the emotional responses that were shown. I am still not very good at decoding messages, yet I have improved greatly. I learned that not only do I need to pay more attention to others, but I must also face myself during interpersonal and intrapersonal communication settings. Due to the mistakes I have learned from and still make from time to time, I have some advice and learning opportunities you can take during the decoding of interpersonal communication. Emotions are something every human possesses. During interpersonal communication, it is best to shut off personal thoughts and place yourself in others' shoes to understand better where they are coming from. Doing this will also activate personal emotions. Remember, because of perception taking, the emotions you may experience are not your own. Because of empathy, be sure to watch nonverbal communication cues given during this time. The person speaking may have a negative response to how you are looking. It is safe during this time to summarize what you heard and tell the other person you understand where they are coming from. Or if you don't, ask questions. Also, ask them to continue speaking and that you are interested in what they have to say. This is how you can return to stage one and continue to assess the conversation and gain an understanding of the person speaking. Reciprocation is used during turn taking and usually requires some patience. Before beginning this stage, ask if you can respond to what you listened to and decode it. Self disclosure is good and can place you in a vulnerable place. During self disclosure, make sure you're staying within the conversation's context. Belvin states in section 7.4 that it is good for building rapport, and sharing too much can damage your image. Understanding how to balance how much to share Remembering who initiated the conversation and when to give nonverbal cues like holding hands and eye contact when needed is important when reciprocating. Depending on the positive ways you reciprocate, it can boost intimacy and provide confidence for both parties when addressing the dark side of communication during interpersonal and intrapersonal conversations, thus creating a healthy relationship during maintenance. Because impressions change the more each person interacts in interpersonal communication, critical thinking must occur after any conversation. It is important to reestablish rapport with whom you interpersonally communicate from conversation to conversation. Showing nonverbal cues that you are listening and showing patience when waiting to speak will rebuild prototypes and schemas. Bevan says that prototypes are the mental images you have about another's attitude and behaviors, and schemas are the collection of these prototypes stored in your memory from past experiences. The goal here is to help facilitate the change of stereotypes placed based on the number of times mistakes were made. The advice given may be very challenging at first, and you may feel as if you are alone trying to better interpersonal communication. There are ways you can look ahead towards positive interpersonal communication. Reaching out to your interpersonal communication partner for help can ease some stress. Try setting a goal with the other person seeking to be accountability partners for better communication strategies. Listen to their ideal image and share yours about the relationship. Seek compromises and refer back to them as often as needed to steer conversation towards positive resolution. Understand it takes time to unlearn unwarranted behaviors and to change personal views from truthful experiences. Patience for yourself and others is key to decoding messages. It may take trying to talk about conflicts in public for a while until you both agree you have reached positive interpersonal communication for private settings. Learning to comprehend and interpret the self concept of others during interpersonal communication can help build a healthy relationship professionally, academically, and with loved ones. Decoding messages is a great skill to have when showing care and consideration of others. And remember, one of the most important steps in decoding messages is to ask a question and listen for an answer. Questions are also best to ask continually if the answer seems complex or if you need help interpreting what is stated in interpersonal communication. Note that there is a chance that a question can result in receiving an emotional response. Remember, how you respond with self disclosure can reestablish rapport and help bring clarity when decoding messages in interpersonal communication. Here are some references and some resources that you can use to go back to view some of the statements that I made prior from Belvin's Making Connections, Understanding Interpersonal Communications from our University of Arizona Global Campus, and Renee Edwards, Being Misunderstood as a Person, the Role of Identity, Reappraisal, and Perception Taking. Um, for decoding messages. Thank you.